thing. So I can be found at askmomparenting.com and Ask Mom Parenting on YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook.
Perfect. So, do me a favor. How did you get involved in this and why Ask Mom Parenting?
Well, how far back do you want me to go on mine? All right, I'm an entrepreneur, and I'm married to a guy who is in the military, and so I've always run my own business, and I married a guy who likes kids. And I'm not really wasn't a big fan of children, but I'm like, I'll have a kid for you. Nicest thing I've ever done for anybody. And then after we had the first one, I was like, okay, we had one, let's try to have a second. Done. This is what you get. And I ended up having natural triplets. And so I went from 1 to 4 kids overnight and found myself completely overwhelmed, drowning, sleeping at red lights, just really overwhelmed with 4 kids so quickly, a husband that deployed, and my own business where we did depend on my income. So, um, as with most people who teach, we are usually the ones that have the most to learn. So we go through quite the incredible journey through our discovery process and our learning journey as to what the universe gives us. And I did have a lot to learn, and I was yelling and so forth. So I've taken a bunch of classes. I did some behavioral science classes. I've studied Montessori. I'm a behavior strategist at this point, and um, because I know what it feels like to have children, so many at one time, screaming, yelling, I'm yelling, getting the routine on track and all of that type of stuff. I have been coaching parents ever since my kids were about 8 or 9, where I've been able to teach parents what I've learned and what I've studied and what works. So I'm in a unique position to have been through the ages 2 to 20 and more. And I know every age and phase, and I've been through them, and I can tell you what works. I have a course that I've created on how to stop the yell-free parenting formula. So I've got this dialed in.
I couldn't imagine going from 1 to 4 in that period of time. What's something that you learned about yourself during that initial parenting journey?
I really learned just, I mean, well, I don't know if I'm embodying the patience that I should have, but I learned patience, but I also really learned to become a lot less selfish. And I think that's what most parents would say. But I'm a giant proponent of putting the mirror on myself and looking to myself to change to affect other people's change. So in other words, I've learned how you can't change anyone else's behavior. And I was somewhat of a control freak because I'm in my own business. I make all my own decisions. My husband's in the military, so I always kind of gently made fun of him because he has to, do what everybody tells him. And I would never be able to do that. So the kids taught me that, I have to meet them where they're at. And that's going to take a whole new level of strategy and patience and understanding and empathy. And I mean, it goes on and on what I've learned. I've learned so much, but I think my biggest takeaway is just that we can't control anybody else's behavior, and I can only affect myself and my changes. And that's what I had to do to stop yelling to get kids to listen to me.
One woman that I used to know, and I say used to know because we're no longer friends,
Uh-huh.
but one thing she shared when she became a parent was that she found it very difficult to be vulnerable
Mm.
to her children, to her spouse, just to be vulnerable as a person. Similar to what you explained, she was very successful in her company works for, and then when she was an entrepreneur, she was very successful. And because she was used to playing quote unquote by her own rules,
Mm.
now in her household, she couldn't do that because you can't just point the finger, hey, do this,
You
right?
cannot. I'm here to
Yeah,
tell
you can't. Right? Yeah, kids would be like,
you.
no, mom, I don't want to do that, right?
My
So
oldest taught me that lesson right away. I mean, yes, absolutely.
yeah, yeah. So for I guess my question then for you is like I'm going to take it from a woman's perspective, right? Like how do women balance that then between understanding that maybe who they are at work won't necessarily be the same person who they are at home?
Well, and that's a distinction that I very much had to delineate, being in my own business where I called my own shots and then having these little people that all 4 of them needed to be reached in a different way. they could not be all handled in the same with the same method and with the same message. So I the way I mean everybody gets to their self-realizations in a different way and through a variety of different means based on how they were raised and what skills and tools they have and what skills and tools they're willing to get. Therefore, when I'm coaching parents, I can usually see at what stage the parent is in terms of their readiness to adapt change as to their behavior. And I teach them, um, the counterintuitive piece of parenting is that we are taught that we have to change the child's behavior. That is not correct. What we have to do is change our behavior because our child is reacting to us. So when we're behaving stressed or we're yelling or we're acting controlling, the behavior, what comes first, right? The behavior or, my reaction or their reaction to me. So what I've learned is that my behavior and my reactions trigger the reaction from my child. So if I want to affect a different reaction from my child and change their behavior and get them to listen to me, I have to be worth listening to, and that does not mean yelling, and that does not mean controlling, and that means giving freedom, having boundaries and freedom within those boundaries. So we all have to be at different states of readiness, to really answer your question as to how do I balance all of that and how do I, it's a state of readiness. We're all at different stages of readiness to accept our role in the behavior we're receiving and what we need to do to affect the change from our child.
Based on the people that you work with, is that a difficult behavior to accept that you can't do the yelling, you can't do the controlling? It's maybe you have to give more freedom and maybe you have to work with the child versus maybe what you and I grew up with because we don't look like we're that far apart in age, is that you do what I say for you to do.
Uh, I can tell with a parent, like some people respond differently to putting the mirror on themselves. And some parents start out like, I'm screaming, I just want to know, what do I do? Just tell me what to do and I'll do it. And other parents I see, depending on maybe their background or what we're working through, they may have more of a fog as to not accepting that their child is reacting to them or they're yelling. So I'll talk to a parent and many times they will reach out and say, I'm yelling and I don't know what else to do. But that is such a very surface statement because yelling comes from either how you were raised or your stress or how do you re-manage your daily schedule. I mean, in other words, what I do is I try to empower parents to look at what they have control over. So sometimes we're busy chasing our tail and we're like, sometimes we just need to make a different decision and go, well, then why am I staying up so late? Or why am I, let's look at what we are in control of and what might be triggering our yelling and our stress and our harried moments. It's a very dynamic and ever-changing landscape, for parents, but I do find that by the time they reach my doorstep, they are at a point of going, okay, I submit I just need to know what to do.
What do you then think are maybe some of the obstacles that parents face when it comes to identifying maybe their own parenting style and how it's impacting their family?
Well, one of the biggest things that I see, that's my biggest challenge with coaching and working with parents, is that we're able to have an intellectual conversation like you and I are doing right now. We can be in a coaching environment and we can talk about how yelling is creating the kids to not trust you and to, here's all of these things that are going on with how we're parenting. And then when we talk about the changes that we need to make, whether it's, soliciting your child's opinion, like getting them on board, how do we partnership parent? How do we get them involved and get buy-in to the decisions and the rules? And at the point of execution is where the parents find the challenge. So that's why I think coaching is really important because it makes the material come to life and it helps it come to life in your home. So there is a disconnect between an ability to go, yes, I hear you and I understand. But then when I'm home and I'm stressed and I'm back into that whole familiar patterning, what am I supposed to do again? Like, oh, what was I supposed to say? And I went through that myself when I had to change my habit of yelling. It took me months, weeks. I did have to go to classes. I did need to be reminded. I did need to go, okay, I hear you, but how does that apply to me in my life? In my case, my husband's deployed and I have 4 kids under 4. Well, of course I'm yelling. So I understand logical consequences, but I don't know how that applies to me. So the, personalized content for each home and how to apply it and how that might be incorporated into what your past experiences are as how you were raised and all of that has to get incorporated. But that's the number one thing I see is an ability to understand what we need to do, but not being able to execute at the moment. That's what I've been seeing parents just like, but darn it, because what I teach is very common sense and practical, but for some reason we're not all doing it. Why? Why are we making things why are we about punishment when we know it doesn't work? It didn't work on us, right? So it's interesting why we keep doing the same things that our generations did to us. My mom grounding me, or my mom yelling at me, or why are these things so easily repeatable when we know they don't work?
I will 100% agree. Like, there's a few parents that I remember speaking to, and they said, Terrain, I'm a logical person, but once my emotions get riled up, logic goes out the window.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Right? So it's like the default setting for so many people is that emotional, over the top reaction. And you made a fantastic point where you said that, well, as children, we didn't like it. Why are we repeating it? And sometimes that takes you back to my coaching, whereas it's all you know, right? Like it's
Mhm.
like the person who grew up with alcoholic parents and all their partners are alcoholics,
Yeah, yeah,
right? It's all they know. So if you know the punishment, and I'm guessing you're referring to like let's say more corporal, like the spanking and the belt and the shoe and the wooden spoon and whatever parents could get a hold of back in those days,
yeah.
right? We didn't like it as children, but I guess so many people they're looking at it as well. All I know is the shoe or nothing, and they can't do nothing, right? So why do you think then there's a disconnect between more people going out there and saying that I need help with this, I need coaches, I need mentors, I need therapists? Why do you think then maybe some people, or not everyone, are a little reluctant to seek out the help?
I think that there is a giant movement towards seeking help right now. I think there are a lot of people in therapy, and there are a lot of children I know that are in therapy. So many of the parents that I coach, their children are in therapy. And I also do coach children, and I coach. My favorite is preteens and teens. I love working with teens. So if I'm working with the parent, I will sometimes also work with the teen. But I don't know why they're not, I don't know. I mean, I think that back when we were being raised and we were being punished or whatever, that whatever our parents were doing to us, we don't know what else to do. And we want the behavior to stop. I know in my case, when I was yelling, I just didn't, my oldest was just challenging me and I was like, I just need this behavior to stop. So I'm gonna yell because if I don't yell, you're not gonna listen. And I need to raise my voice to show that I mean business. And that might work temporarily and in the beginning, but then, long term, when the kid just started glazing over at me like a deer in the headlights, like, screw you, it just looked at me like, I don't even hear you. You're yelling. I don't hear you. And I was like, I got to come up with some new techniques. But I don't know why, we just keep repeating that and we know it doesn't work, but sometimes we just want the behavior to stop. And what we teach as coaches and whenever and you go to a workshop, whenever you're learning a new way to do something, it's hard. It stresses your brain, especially when you're already in a stressful environment, and I'm still dealing with kids and friends over and making dinner and working. And I'm like, okay, what was I supposed to say again? And it's hard. It's hard to affect change, but